Okay, I'm Jean Parker, and I'm located in Tucson, Arizona, which is just north of the infamous US-Mexico border. And I am an educator. I am in charge of the education programs at the Desert Rose Baha'i Institute here in Arizona. We have both on-site and online programs, and I also teach university. I teach nonprofit management, and what I feel acutely as a need with my students and learners is this idea that there have been such drastic convulsive changes in the past 2 years, and particularly with the younger ones that I work with, the need for the adoption and integration of resilience and hope and the ways to navigate huge amounts of change very quickly. So there's been a lot of trauma that has come from this, but that gives us an opportunity to prepare people with skills and attitudes and belief systems that that make them come out of this able to move forward in a much more constructive way than they can right now, and also in a much more elevated place than they would have prior to the pandemic. So for us, the pandemic is still in the acute phase. It's not going anywhere. And that's what I notice in my students, is that they're just fearful and feel devalued by society. Nobody took care of them. No one looked out for them. So that's what is on my mind this morning.
Great. Thank you, Jean. Anything that you would like to put in terms of what is it in you that can respond to that need?
Yeah, so I have a lot of personal experience with integrating resilience, and so that's something that I bring to the table in working with my students. I'm able to bring that in varying amounts depending on the context that I'm working in, and so that's one thing that I bring, but also the knowledge that there are ways to increase one's ability to navigate a time like this, even as a young person, that will make a huge difference later on in their lives. So I suppose it's conviction.
Yes.
You know? Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you, Jean. Mark, then Gareth.
Yeah, kia ora, ka mihi o te, o ki te iwi o te roha, kia nai tahu, kama toko noa, which is acknowledge the lands of the local tribe Nai Tahu, and my name's Mark. So my attention is very much in the local area that I live. So that is Otautahi, Christchurch in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And there's a few reasons for that focus on local place at the moment. One being that I returned back to New Zealand about 1.5 years ago, and I've been living in this place the last 6 months, and it's very much on my awareness that that I need to be grounded here, and that's the place that my work needs to be done. And from a slightly more philosophical perspective, or a sort of methodological perspective, it's very much attention on what is at the root of what is happening, and giving attention to that, or at least a journey of learning in that direction, so that we sort of address the outcomes that we have at their real root level, and with the belief that if we do that, there is actually a pathway to actions that we don't know what they are yet, because they're sort of what come out of the journey, but they actually have the possibility of driving different outcomes, unlike most change activities that are being attempted. That sort of physically shows up in the work that I do as a systems change leadership coach, and it's very much a key component of the research I'm about to start, and the overlap between wellbeing economics, living systems principles, and the food sector here in Christchurch, where I live. From a skills perspective, I would say that I've been sort of seriously exploring this for some time. So there is some experience in learning that I've attained, and a commitment to continuing to learn as a way, as a methodology towards the change that I can do, and the influence that I can have. Some critical thinking, and I guess like real strong values base that I'm pretty committed to. So hopefully all of that, I can do the work that is mine to do, and that can radiate out from where I do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Gareth, then Patrick.
Hi, folks. So I wear two hats. I'm a clinician, and I work for a big NHS trust here in London. I'm a sustainability clinical lead there. So I do environmental work. And my second hat is as the founder of Solve Earth, which is a community of environmental entrepreneurs, or aspiring environmental entrepreneurs. Where's my attention at the moment? I think what I'm seeing in the community members we've got is this growing desire to be involved in work that's meaningful. I think they're looking around at traditional careers, and even this includes sustainability careers. And they're like, do I really want to be part of an organization that's part of this old system? Because I know it's not right, even if they don't logically understand that there's flaws in it. I think they intuitively sense that there's something not quite right, even in some of the most best intentioned organizations, because of course they're working with this flawed foundation. And I think people are getting a sense of that instinctively now. And so this generation are really thinking, you know, what am I going to do post-COVID? The world of work's been completely changed and thrown around. And the environmental crisis is encouraging people to look at that in particular and say, what am I going to do with my life? So what is it in me that's ready to respond to that need for more meaningful work around the environmental crisis? I think maybe it's the clinician in me, but when things are broken or not working properly, I have an instinct to try and fix it. I'm kind of obsessed with waste and untidy areas. I'm not obsessive compulsive. Maybe I am. Maybe I'm borderline. But I feel the need to fix stuff. And whenever I see a bigger problem, I just want to go deeper to the foundation to pull out the roots and get to the heart of it. Because as a clinician, you don't treat symptoms, right? You go to the root cause. And the deeper you go in the environmental crisis, the deeper you see that the root causes are very, very deep. They're deep into who we are, human psychology, how we've arranged our economy. So thanks to Graham, I've gone deep into the rabbit hole there, but I think I have the desire to fix things, so I'm ready to put my heart into it and do something worthy. Beck.
Thank you, Gareth. Patrick and then TR.
Sorry. Hello, everyone. My name is Patrick. I'm from Canada, from Quebec. And where's my attention right now is how can we bring to the world the full potential of disruptive technologies that can really benefit to life, to sustain life here on this planet. And basically it's how to make life flowing better, because life is respect the free will. And at one point, if we decide that we do something, life will respect that. But at one point we find out that we cannot sustain this life on the planet because we continue to do the same thing that is against that. So basically we want to help people to kind of, purify their dream by helping them to find the true essence of their dream and put that true essence in movement. And personally, I'm in my essence, I'm really good at juggling with different things that are coming to me. And when I know the real essence of this, put those essence like working together makes magic. So that I bring my passion, my energy, my curiosity. We did work a lot last year, Graham and us, on a new project that is bringing new technology to this world. And yeah, that's a check. Yeah, thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, Patrick. Welcome, Mary. We're just doing a round of getting to know each other, of what is it that I'm seeing in the world around me that is calling for attention, and what is it in me, in my essence, that is responding to that call. So TR is next, and Mary, if you'd be willing, please pick up after TR.
Well, it's great hearing from all of you. As I mentioned in my little introduction, I am one of the founders of Acorn DAO, and we are a decentralized autonomous organization, and we're focused on incentivizing actions that increase and maintain native ecosystems. So incentivizing tree planting, beach cleanup, environmental restoration, and creating a verifiable proof behind that. So what we really care about is making sure that we're able to measure and verify that the actions that improve this world are able to be done along with the benefits from them. And a little bit about my background and what drives me. It's before the pandemic, I was a Peace Corps volunteer down in Paraguay. So I lived for 2.5 years in Paraguay, trying to get farmers paid for carbon credits and forest restoration, and found out that the government of Paraguay was pocketing the majority of the money that was supposed to go to those farmers. So the farmers were having to cut down their trees and sell it for money because of that. So yeah, I came back to the United States and have my studies around environmental studies, and recently got involved with a PhD in environmental economics. So figuring out ways in which to make our environmental and economic system merge so our values are aligned in that way.
Excellent. I love the sound of that. And it's great to have somebody from the DAO community with us. So picking up on that, that whole economic side is, let me respond myself to my two questions. So I will now put on a participant hat. And what's really at the center of my attention and has been for 15 years now is this whole space of biosphere degradation and collapse. And let's say at the center of what I'm paying attention to is where it's showing up in terms of the climate crisis that we're in and all of the biosphere tipping points that are in themselves irreversible, where the way back does not go back along the same path as the way forwards. And, you know, if I think of carbon dioxide now, even if we were to immediately start withdrawing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, you know, not just zero carbon dioxide, but net positive, the global temperature would still continue to rise for a decade or two before it really starts dropping. So, you know, that's what I mean when I say that the path back does not simply mean engage reverse gear and reverse back along the path that we've progressed to here. And so that's been very much at the center of my attention, especially over the Christmas period, where I stepped off the hamster wheel and did a lot of reading and catching up on everything. And what we're bringing to the table, what we're up to, is over the past 15 years, we've been working on one of the common themes in here: where are the root causes? And one of the big root causes that we found was the way that we build organizations in ways where we can treat them as property. So whilst we call the organization a person, it's enslaved because we can buy it, we can sell it. The owners determine its evolutionary path rather than it having its own agency and freedom to determine its own path. And that happens because we incorporate companies around money only, rather than around all of the capitals that are coming into it. And this is something that shows up in many places. And that's the one side. The other side of it, and this may link to what you're doing in your PhD, TR, is looking at things as strata of systems that fit together, and recognizing that if you don't get things working in a whole way across all of the strata, then you run into problems. And the strata that we're working with is from my internal systems and interactions, stratum 2, our systems and interactions as we interact with each other as human beings, stratum 3, how we organize to do work, whether it's in a DAO way of organizing and governing the work, or in a traditional hierarchical matrix organization. Stratum 4 are the systems and interactions of how all of the different capitals come together and interact with each other. You know, so in a DAO context, that would be the governance of the DAO as an entirety, as an organization, and what are all of the capitals and stakeholder perspectives that have governance over the DAO. Or in a normal company, it's making sure that all of the stakeholders have voting rights, that all of the capitals that are touched by the company can govern the company. And then stratum 5 is how companies connect with each other to form local circular economies or local business ecosystems, or how groups of societies interact, etc. And stratum 6 is our global economy, global society, and that's where the biosphere as a whole sits. So what we're bringing to the table is basically 15 years of prototyping, a radical reinvention of how things work across all 6 of those strata, so that in each stratum, the essence, as Patrick says, the essence can really show up in its full entirety and really come into free movement because there's no resistance. And we're now at a point where we know from all of our prototyping that if we work this way, this unlocks 10 times the power to change that we normally have. One of the things that I love to show people is, let me get there, these two graphs. What you're seeing there at the moment on, sorry, this graph, that looks just like a normal, and I do apologize, Gene, that you can't see it perhaps clearly enough. This graph is showing what a normal investment portfolio looks like, where you have 100 companies all starting at the same place, and after a year, 92 of them are bankrupt. The average returns, and there are the average returns along there. The average returns are dominated by one or two companies that do extremely well. All of this is happening, and this is relevant both to normal companies and to DAOs, to any organization, and to individual human beings. The fundamental problem that we've uncovered is that we build companies, we treat our lives these days in the West without recognizing clearly that what happened at each stage of the company's past affects where it is today. What has happened in my life from birth to today affects where I am today. And what that means is that the statistics that economists use, so for your PhD, TR, the key word here is ergodicity, which very few economists have ever heard of, very few business leaders has ever heard of. And the essence of it is, because economists and business schools are teaching the wrong statistics to understand what's happening in business processes or in life processes, we're wasting a huge amount. And the answer, is to, in this graph, if we recognize that companies work best when they collaborate, some competition, some collaboration, just like nature works best when you have some competition, some collaboration. Evolution works at the scale of the rabbit warren, the bee hive, not the individual rabbit, the individual bee. And once you recognize that and you build into businesses the capacity for systemic collaboration with each other, as you can see, if you compare the graphs, you open up 10 times the success, which means that if you do that, you can make the impossible normal. You can still maintain the kind of financial returns on investments and generate massive natural, social, human wealth returns as well. So we truly believe that we can make the impossible normal. We just need to change the way we build everything we're building, and then we can have massive regeneration without it being a sacrifice. It's something where as Patrick says, this is a way of enabling the essence of each of the capitals to work together with the essence of the other capitals, so that they are in a complicity with each other and all of them can grow. So this is what we're building. That's what the book that Jack and I wrote is all about. And the big challenge, the big challenge that we're wrestling with is very much that challenge. And this is where I'm really glad that you're in the call, TR. This whole challenge of raising the money that is needed to really build something that is fundamentally new from front to back. And in particular, where the company, the organization, is not property. It cannot be bought or sold. And this is where, Gareth, myself, we work very closely together. We've been looking at the DAOs for a while. I did some testing on a DAO about 4 years ago now, and things weren't quite ready then for what we were doing. But I'm now really curious about what's happening in the DAO space, especially what's happening in the ReFi space, and how that could connect with the progress we're making talking to investors who are in the traditional space, and where we can build something that will really unleash the kinds of financial capital resources that we need to build ecosystems of businesses that are truly net positive, regenerative across all capitals. So that sets the stage. I will say check at that point, and open space for anybody who wants to bring in any thoughts, impulses, questions, comments, to go. Yeah.
So I really like what you're saying there, and nature is a good representative of how we should establish organizations. A little bit of a lot of collaboration, a little bit of competition, and one of the things that has popped up recently in the regenerative finance world of cryptocurrency, it's really awesome because at this point in time, we're in a very unique stage in regenerative finance or environmental finance in the cryptocurrency world, and that we have so few players here that we can really create an ecosystem map of who they are. And we, as a collective of regenerative finance organizations, created a DAO that is able to coordinate collaboration among all of the different DAOs. DAOs are just really an organization mechanism that is non-hierarchical, is the best way to think of a DAO in my mind. And regenerative finance DAO is now coordinating all these different organizations that I just sent the mind master map of, so that we can further develop this map, and also another mind map that shows these different organizations as more and more pop up, so that we can support them in funding, resource management, what in particular they're working on, and create an ecosystem of collaboration instead of competition. So yeah, that was one thing that just came to mind and wanted to share.
Excellent. Thank you, TR.
Simple question, Graham. What was that word you used that started with O?
A word?
Economists don't know, but what's happening?
It starts with an E, ergodicity.
Okay.
And I'll say a couple of things about ergodicity. So if you look at this graph here, this dotted line going up and this dashed dotted line going down, if a system satisfies the assumption of ergodicity, these two lines would be identical. And the thing is, this line gives the expectation value in a way that is very difficult to calculate in real life, but it's the accurate way of calculating for almost all processes of living organisms and businesses. If the system is ergodic, then this line going down and that line going up lies on top of each other. And so business leaders and economists simply assume that that is always true. And so they use the simple line going upwards to calculate future expectation values. And in this particular example that I'm showing here, what this basically says is simplistic and wrong statistics in this business situation would say the business will grow by 5% every business cycle. And so whether you win or lose in a given cycle, just keep going, because sooner or later that 5% growth rate will kick in and you will win. On average, you'll grow at 5%. And that's false. When you use the accurate but far more difficult way of calculating, you realize that it's actually this dropping line. Actually, what's happening is a 5% loss per business cycle. And so the longer you keep going, the more you're going to drive your company into bankruptcy. Yeah, I go into the details of this in section 6.4 and 6.5 of my book. But it's one of the big misses in economics. And the thing I'll just touch on here, this is equally relevant to life, and why the whole question of systemic discrimination and disadvantage is actually far more relevant than today's discourse really recognizes. Yeah, if it's each of these lines could also be an individual human being's path through life rather than a business's bank balance and path through money. And this really shows when you calculate really what happens when something negative or positive happens in somebody's life. The consequences are actually far stronger over a far longer period of time than people's naive way of thinking takes into account. Check. Jean, I see your yellow hand up in the air.
Yes, thank you. I have a couple of comments and a couple of resources to share.
Great.
So it seems to me, first of all, I like your parallel from organizational thinking to individual thinking, because it has to be that in order to change society, we have to change individual thinking and behaving. Yes. And vice versa. Individual thinking and behavior is also a reflection of the society, sorry to say at the moment. And so it seems as though we could make an assertion that applying concepts of analysis, regardless of reality, is part of the problem, right? So we use an analysis formula to paint a picture based on certain assumptions that go into that analysis formula, instead of doing the work to figure out what is really going on with that company or that individual, and what's the context that they're working in. And so it seems to me that if we continue doing this, we have growth for the sake of growth instead of growth for to fulfill some sort of a substantive purpose, right? So in the case of an individual, it could be, I don't know, moving forward to acquire more and more financial wealth or prestige without looking at what does that really mean, and does it make sense in my particular context. Context, I think, is a really important element, and we do have to do the work. And simply applying a formula without understanding the underlying motivations, the environment that something or someone is operating in, is part of the problem, because then we come out with flawed data and data points. The two resources that I want to share, unfortunately, I don't have links close at hand to give you, but my colleague Arthur Dahl has put together a very good video where he talks about coral reefs as an ecosystem that is innately cooperative. So it's not like the coral gets together and thinks and says, okay, we're going to create a cooperative system. But it happens naturally in nature. His talk is called The Economics of Nature. And he applies this to human-created organizations and ecosystems as well. But talking about the reef as a metaphor, but a metaphor in reality that we can look to understand, yeah, we need all these parts, and all of the parts need to be functioning properly in order for the whole, the collective, to function properly. The other resource is a fellow called Michael Carlberg, and he does a lot of writing on the culture of contest or competition and how harmful that is in every aspect of life. This idea that there are winners and losers in things, or that competition is the way to prove your betterness or your more a deeper level of experience instead of collaboration. So I encourage the friends to look at those two resources. I think you'll find them to be very helpful.
Great. Thank you, Jean.
And I'd like to hear from Mary.
Unfortunately,
heard from
Mary
Mary.
seems to have dropped off the call,
Ah, okay.
or at least I'm not seeing her anywhere in the call. And I'm on gallery view, so I should see everybody. Gareth, can I encourage you to bring in a few thoughts?
Yep, certainly, Graham. First of all, I would like to say that was the best pitch I've ever seen you do. That was really on point. Or maybe it's just the first time I fully understood every aspect of what you were saying. So yeah, that was really good. I'm in a private chat with TR, just asking a bit more about the DAOs, because as you said, this is something that we're really looking into closely as an enabler or a first step into building the regenerative ecosystems of startups and companies that you speak about. Where to begin there? I think to say that there's a lot happening out there in this space. It's incredibly innovative, and it's encouraging to see people coming to the same conclusion for regenerative organizations or new regenerative structures in their own language, in their own way. You know, Mark in Christchurch is coming in from a particular angle. Jean, Tucson, they're seeing the same things but describing it in a different way using their own language. And this is fantastic because it means there's a bigger movement emerging all over the world at the same time, which is the way that innovation tends to appear. But what we need to do is try and harness that and make the first steps to get this thing going. Because as you point out, very difficult to convince traditional investors to put money into something that's completely new back to front. You need a very innovative, forward-thinking investor with the ability to invest funds that are highly experimental. And so we've been tracking DAOs for a while now, and I can see that they offer the attraction of crowd fundraising, which is maybe a key element of raising money fast from the crowd, that it doesn't involve one or two wealthy investors using a large fund. And it involves decentralized governance of those funds as well, which is a key element of the regenerative companies in the ecosystem you want to build, Graham, the FairShares Commons incorporation. A key element is the power and wealth sharing, and DAOs really enable that. So I guess the long and the short of it is what I'm saying is there's a lot of money and energy in the DAO space and the crypto space. And I think if it's channeled in the right way, and in particular that the foundations of the DAO that we build, if we choose to build a DAO to get the initial stages built, need to be carefully designed. But I think once it's carefully designed and the money comes in, then it'll really be a trigger or a spark, an enabler for what we want to build. So we're moving really into practical action. How do we do this? How do we actually get these things going and get them going at scale? And I think the DAO has a lot of potential there, at least in the initial stages, to get things moving. And maybe it's much bigger than that. Maybe it will become an integral part of this future regenerative ecosystem.
Thank you, Gareth. My sense, just building on that, is that one of the things that I keep saying, and it sometimes takes a while before people grok what I'm saying, is that the FairShares Commons is really an essence rather than any specific concretization of that essence. And so you can quite happily build a FairShares Commons on the blockchain on a DAO basis or as a normal company in national legislation. And the beauty of it is, the explorations we did a few years ago showed just how powerful the FairShares Commons design principles are at building something that can give the legal wrapper in national legislation to match a DAO that is operating globally. Becoming less vital now that places like Wyoming have actually legally recognized the DAO. But still, there's a lot of power in that. And in particular, Gareth, to your point, we built about 4 or 5 years ago a FairShares Commons MVP on the blockchain just to prove that it could be done. And my thinking is the whole DAO is still very young. We're still exploring everything that can be done as a DAO. And I wouldn't be surprised if in a decade or 2 or 3, however long it takes, this traditional way of building companies disappears. That everything is being done on whatever emerges out of where we are right now in the DAO space. Because at the end of the day, let's say the strict name for a blockchain is a distributed ledger. So in a sense, there's not anything different at heart between a blockchain and a fountain pen and a book. Both of them are recording things. So there's no reason why we can't replace everything that we're currently doing today to build companies in issuing shares electronically, et cetera, all of that can be replaced and should be replaced, I think, with blockchain technology. So, my sense is really that the DAOs are the way of the future. And the only thing that I'm see as essential is that when we build a DAO that is truly intended to be part of the kind of economy that will build a whole economy serving a whole society, that every single DAO is built so that no single stakeholder perspective, opinion, or kind of capital can dominate over any other one. And that the DAO as a whole is free to fulfill its purpose, that it can never, at a simplistic level, it can never be bought or sold just by somebody coming in with lots of money and buying up everything. So, those are some of the the important things for a DAO to truly include the essence of the FairShares Commons design themes.
Yeah, and I think those are great things to have happen, because currently a lot of DAOs are getting dominated by whales that buy in all of the tokens that really control the voting power or the governance power of this organization. And then these whales could be dormant, so that really kills off the organization itself when that happens. One of the ideas that we have had with that is to encode in these governance tokens the ability to only own 0.01% or something small as that amount per wallet, so that it doesn't happen that these whales are able to accumulate all these tokens.
Yes, yeah, I completely agree with that. The role of the whale is a massive problem. It's one of the reasons why I am fond of the Telos blockchain at the moment. Is, you know, they seem to have built it in a way that has not led to massive whales emerging in the very early days. To build on that, have a look. Let me just jump to that briefly. In the FairShares Commons, what we're doing is saying, sorry, I'll get there. There we go. So in the FairShares Commons, what we're saying, if we built to build a FairShares Commons on a DAO, you'd have different tokens representing the different kinds of stakeholders. So in this particular example, there are stewards, staff, individual producer consumer members, professional producer consumer members, donors who don't want any return, and investors who do want a return. And the voting, 100% of the vote in any decision on the DAO is weighted across the different stakeholder groups. So instead of it being a brute force, one token, one vote, and you get the tokens by buying them, in this case, it's one person, one vote, like a typical cooperative, regardless of how many tokens you have. And only the investor tokens can actually be bought, or the donor tokens. The other tokens you earn by acting as a good citizen of the community. So to earn a staff token, you actually need to satisfy the citizenship criteria to be a member of staff, which might be something like you're putting in at least 30 hours a week of your time and effort into the DAO. You're doing this, you maybe have these formal roles, etc. And as I say, the voting is in blocks. So regardless of whether there's one member of staff in this example or 1,000, their vote carries 8% of the total voting fraction in the decision. And this prevents whales from dominating, because first of all, the whale only has one vote, regardless of how many shares the whale has or how many tokens they have. And secondly, the total weight of the tokens that can be bought with money is, in this case, at most 17% of the total weight. So that this is how the FairShares Commons is designed, and I think this is superbly applicable in the DAO as well, to really make sure that there is a functional balance of power across all of the different capitals and opinions and perspective that come into it. Check.
Yeah, I really like that. And yeah, the thought process around that is fantastic to dive further into. Could definitely have a long conversation. We're thinking about distributing within our community based upon community roles. So yeah, there's a saying that's a token used for money, a DAO token used for money lacks a community, but a DAO token used for community building is one of the best rewards. So yeah, that's really something that would be worth considering, definitely.
Yes, no, fully agree with what you're saying. One of the key insights in the FairShares Commons is the recognition that to build something that is truly regenerative, you need to separate completely how you get governance rights from anything around financial rights or share of wealth generated, because governance is really about steering into the future, and how much money you had in the past should have nothing to do with your power to steer into the future. Your power to steer into the future should depend on the depth of your relationship with the organization, and that the stronger somebody's relationship, the more they are really there to steward the organization wisely, the more power they deserve to govern. And the more they're in just to make a quick buck, which is what most whales are, the less power they should have to steward, because they're not there for the organization, they're just there for themselves.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I've been looking at your work for a few years, as you know, and do you have a parallel analysis or a proposition for the NGO sector? So when you talk about the balance of power, which is really, seems to me what we're talking about is the balance of power, the ability to take over an organization, the ability of some entities to be actually a drain on the organization. The NGO sector, in some ways, has similar issues where you have factions that have more governance power than others. You have certainly exploitive employment in NGOs. And you can have an imbalance of money if you have certain people involved in it who contribute a lot of money or who have certain connections and can actually derail the purpose of the NGO through that power.
Yes, absolutely. The real heart of the FairShares Commons is that all of the existing approaches to incorporating companies or building a DAO governance are really based on, let's say, either this or that kind of thinking.
Dichotomous thinking, yeah.
Yes, either you're a for-profit company or you're a non-profit company, a charity. And the essence of the FairShares Commons is to look at how do we integrate these so that we can have the best of all ways,
right,
in a way that counteracts the worst of each. So there's nothing, the whole FairShares Commons is designed from day one so that there's always a significant quantity of the profit that a company makes that is allocated to the non-financial capitals. So you can very easily build a FairShares Commons where you say, right, this is the amount of natural capital that is coming in, this is the amount of social capital that is coming in. And so the representatives of these capitals get this much of the financial profit back to represent that investment of capitals, making it very easy to then structure the whole operation so that every single capital it touches actually gets multiplied. That if natural capital flows in, more natural capital is produced then flows into the company in the first place. You know, kind of if your factory needs water coming in, then the water flowing out of the factory is cleaner than the water flowing into it.
Right.
So
it seems like part of the problem
let me just
is tax. Okay, go ahead.
Let me just close one thing. I haven't quite got to your question. So what that means is that for a true NGO that really is not there to make money, all you do is you turn down to zero the dials that are around profit, and you keep everything else that is around systemically building in a balance of power between the different stakeholder perspectives that enables the organization to be at its highest point of viability, to really stand in its essence. So the simple answer to your question is yes, absolutely. And we already have built FairShares Commons companies that are at least part of the way towards what I think you're thinking of. Check, and back to you.
It seems like part of the problem, though, is tax structure and tax designation in certain places. So, you know, one could establish a company as an NGO or as a social enterprise, I guess, in order to get government recognition. And then as far as the actual governance structure, they could do whatever they wanted to. I mean, there are no, as long as they meet the legal requirements of the particular country, the centralized requirements of that. Or I suppose they could just incorporate as a for-profit, like an LLC or something, and not take on the attributes of what in this country would be a 501c3 or an NGO designation, and perhaps have more flexibility in the way that they operate.
You're absolutely spot on in what you're saying. Company law is actually far more flexible than tax law is. Tax law is the real barrier to doing what we need to do for the essence to truly emerge and be able to flow freely. So keep in mind that the FairShares Commons is an architecture rather than a specific way of building. And so what we've found is that in different countries where the national legislation is different, or in other words, the building materials you have to build a company with, that in some countries we build a FairShares Commons as one single company. In other countries, we might build it as 3 companies, where the 3 companies together have the full functionality of a FairShares Commons.
Right.
So I could imagine that you might say have something that is set up as a foundation that does all of the governance work, and that itself governs something that is a pure nonprofit that qualifies for all of the donor tax breaks that are necessary for certain philanthropists to be willing to engage, and maybe another unit that is a for-profit entity, but where all of the profits feed into the nonprofit.
Right. So it's like a social enterprise.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Or even as a for instance, there are a few very big and relatively old now German companies that are actually more like social enterprises than anything else. Robert Bosch, which is a really big company producing bits for cars. The Robert Bosch Foundation owns almost all of the voting shares and wealth generating shares of the Robert Bosch for-profit company. And so all of the money that the Robert Bosch company feeds into the Robert Bosch Foundation is then used for the non-profit purposes of the foundation. And the foundation has something like 95% of the governance control of the for-profit company.
I want to communicate with you about this in further detail at some point in the near future, because I'm getting ready to do some writing on this whole question, this dichotomous thinking, on a lot of, from a lot of different angles, but one of them is governance structures of NGO and for-profit. It's such a limiting concept to think of them as the only way. I mean, I suppose there are social enterprises that come in between and so forth, but we don't often think of them as a triad. And I think we should. And so I will be in touch with you about that.
Yes, please do. Please do. Mark, you have a yellow hand floating in the air.
Yeah, thank you. A question to follow up this thread, and then a new thread. The question that's sort of not being asked here with respect to governance is why we feel like governance is something that we need. Like, what is the problem that governance addresses? I'm not sure if that's something to like dig into now, but I think that it's an important question for us to seriously inquire into, if we're accepting that governance is a feature of our the way that we organize businesses or any type of entity moving forward. It's like, what is it addressing, and is the idea of governance the best way to address it? Or, you know, I guess to reveal my bias, that perhaps part of how we've gotten to this place in time is because of that idea, because it's a very old idea. And so the question being is are we trying to think different enough as we move forward with different sort of forms of organizing? And are we asking the sort of the deep enough questions? I'm happy for someone to respond to that if they feel so called. And then if after that I do have another question.
Anybody want to respond to that? I as always have a response, but I'd love to hear.
So earlier I sent a link called Colony, and Colony is a DAO creation mechanism, and they use reputation, which we were talking a lot about, of individuals to really make decisions. And this reputation framework is based upon actions. So instead of having that governance always being applicable, that we need to vote on every single action that we do in the organization, you can have these sorts of leads that do actions and they're recorded, but then if they are bad actions, their reputation score goes down. So colony.io is one of the ways in which the DAO community is now thinking about that perspective.
Thanks, TR. Gareth.
I'll offer a really quick back of the envelope response to that one. I think for human beings to organize themselves at scale, we need some kind of replicable structure. Otherwise, you have emergent chaos. So if there's no governance, how can we begin to think about organizing at scale? I think it would be a concept possible. I can't see how it would be possible. So I guess there's a need for some structure that enables the most optimal governance that fits who we are as human beings, I guess. So some structure is necessary for replication.
Yeah, I'll pick up on what you said, Gareth. When I use the word governance in general, I'm pointing at anything that enables a decision to be taken now, where we're taking a decision now that will affect what happens in the future, but we cannot predict with absolute certainty what the future will bring. And so for me, I have my internal governance systems, which includes my tummy saying to me, eat something now, feed me now, which is basically the tummy saying, I don't know where the next meal is going to come from. And the body is telling me we're running out of energy. So I'm going to start creating the emotions that will drive Graham to eat something. And if I think of South Africa, national governance is actually just a way of taking decisions about where should the country go as we step from today to tomorrow to next year to the next century. And the real problems is not, do we have governance or no governance? As Gareth says, if we have no way of taking decisions about two different choices today that are going to affect tomorrow, then we're just completely subject to random fortune. Well, we may still be completely subject to, but governance at least gives the illusion of having a hand in the matter. What really matters is who has the right to engage in those decision processes. What power do they have to defend that right? And then what is the process actually taken by the people who have that right to engage in the decision? Is that process one like deep democracy, for example, is a way of ensuring that no opinion can dominate over another opinion, regardless of the size of people behind each opinion? And that's one of the big issues, say the cooperatives. The governance of a cooperative is dominated by the opinion of the largest number of members of the co-op. The limited company, the governance is dominated by the opinion of who has the most money. In many blockchain situations, governance is dominated by the whales, i.e. those who bought massive numbers of tokens in the early days when they were relatively cheap. So, it's really about designing a way of taking decisions about how we steer into the future that actually works. Whereas at the moment, most of ours don't work. Check.
Yeah, thanks for all those responses. I've got a nice segue, I think, into the question I was going to ask, but the encouragement would be, or the invitation would be to like seriously look at the assumptions that sort of hold up the responses that each of you made to that question, and perhaps that could provide a pathway of inquiry into some of those assumptions maybe not being so helpful as we move forwards. The segue is going to be multi-stepped, and I'll try and make it really quick. You referenced this idea of like hunger being sort of somewhat of a part of a governance mechanism, and I guess the pushback is that that sense of hunger doesn't actually have the ability to then make the next action. It's an information loop that then requires other pieces of that loop to then do something else. So it doesn't actually have control. So potentially there is a difference there. And the way that the thing that I'm sort of grappling with when it comes to DAOs that I'm going to try and get at with my question in this part is, there's a real difference between the location of the feedback and the decision making in a person's body, which is quite a different location to how it could happen in a DAO, where one person could be in Russia and the work could be in South Africa, or it can be very, very distributed, and there's a meaningful difference there. And so anchoring on this idea that was shared in a webinar I was on recently, that I thought, one, it sort of fit my biases, but I also think there's a lot of profound wisdom in it, which is, if we're trying to create a better world, that the first thing that we should do as an individual is to get to know the land that we're on. And like, if we really sort of internalize what that is saying, I think there's a lot of wisdom in there. And if we sort of take that idea, how can that idea be sort of embodied in DAOs, or is there something about how we're doing DAOs that kind of violates that could end up meaning that they end up sort of perpetuating the same things that we're already experiencing, but simply in a different form? So it's kind of like, I guess, a question of the container of a DAO and its ability to disconnect from place and people and planet in that place. Is how can that be maybe addressed, or something around those lines is a curiosity I have that I think is genuine, as opposed to maybe some other curiosities I have, which could be just trying to push an agenda.
Yes, excellent. Thank you for that, Mark. TR, is the DAO person in the room, do you have a response to that?
Yeah, so I think what's really cool in this crypto world is we recognize the responsibility of localization and local currencies. And the concept of the DAO is that it will be able to fractionalize into more local and locally led initiatives. So it will be able to really bring in those perspectives in that situation, so that it can be applicable and the influence can be applicable specifically to that local community.
Excellent. Thank you, TR. We're coming close towards past, so I would suggest, Gareth, you pick up what you want to bring in, and then Patrick, I would love to hear your perspective on what we've been hearing in tonight's call. Gareth.
Yeah, there was a great example you gave, Graham. I think the company's called Uni1, one of the FairShares Commons companies. And they have a phrase called diversity in unity, where you have a structure that connects people across potentially vast distances, but they can also super localize to their locality. So I think if a carefully constructed DAO takes, quite rightly, what Mark's taken into consideration, the importance of the local is I think it's a key part of this as well. Then you can get very high diversity in a DAO in a particular location, and power and responsibility in local hands rather than widely distributed. It's a hard one to conceptualize to see how it would actually work, but I think it's eminently doable.
Yes, I think so, very much so. And I do value what you've brought in, Mark. One of the themes in the book is that the opposite of a deep truth is very often another equally deep truth. So I think that there's truth in what you were saying and truth in what I was saying. And there's power in synthesizing them. Patrick.
Yes. The title of this webinar was Call for Action. Okay, and we did discuss a lot about various concepts, a lot of theory, and it's always amazed me how much hankers we have that are keeping us from starting to act and really act with small action that we believe that will bring great impact to the world. And yesterday I was because on what we are working Graham, and we have a very disruptive technology that we want to bring to the world. And the inventor of that technology said, I have no fear for the future, Patrick. It's just a matter of event. I know that the technology that we are developing will take place of all the other similar equipment in this world, because the way I design it is closer to the truth than any other equipment equivalent to that. So you know what, when we go back to the very essence of what we are doing and we keep focus on that, I think that's where we can have the most impact. So we could say the same thing. Let's say I have no fear for the future. It's just a matter of event. I know that FairShares Commons will take place of every other type of incorporation on the planet, because it's closer to the truth than any other type of incorporation, for instance. Okay, or like on DAO. Okay, if we have something that really is close to the basic essence, then I think we increase our chance, and then we can focus on that. So that's my my opinion for now. But yeah, thank you very much for that webinar, and look forward to continue to dig deeper in those topics in the future. Check.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Patrick. And as a final thought from me is, for me, 2022 really is a year of action. This year, next year, and perhaps another 2 or 3 years after that are really the last years where we still have some opportunity to flatten the curve of biosphere collapse. We're past the point where we can prevent it. Climate change, biosphere collapse is already here, but we can at least flatten the curve and have a more gentle path going through it. And in this call, we haven't quite got to the point of really identifying where can we act. With Patrick's relationship with Evolute 6 is now very strong, and there's clarity there on where we act. With Gareth as well, it's very strong, and there's clarity there on where we can act. And so my invitation is, with what we're doing, part of the platform we're building is a multi-currency platform, multiple currencies for each capital that we touch. And we've been waiting for the whole blockchain world to get to a point where we can simply tap into what's being built rather than having to build it ourselves. And what you were saying, Mark, about the land and really being, I forget the exact words you used, but really being connected with it. I think that this is part of it, that we need to take action in ways that span all scales and really work at the essence of each scale. And with what you're doing, Jean, in terms of taking your experience of resilience and bringing it in, that's essential for what we're doing. So what I found intriguing at this call is, like many of the calls that we're in, we each have an arena of action. All of these arenas of action are needed. And so, but we haven't yet quite got to the point of figuring out how can we connect so that Jean can stand fully in her essence and bring everything that she's doing into fruition in such a way, in a uni-one sense, that her uniqueness is strengthened by the common oneness of action that unites all of us, and the common oneness of action that unites all of us is as big and powerful as it can be, because the uniqueness of each of our actions is feeding in and complicit with each other. So, that's part of our ambition, is to build ecosystems where that can happen. So looking forward to what has emerged, or excited by what's emerged in the ReFI DAO space over the past 3 months, and very curious about how that might actually be able to serve as the platform going forwards, the toolkit to do this. So that's my sort of thoughts, and I suggest I know we're at the end of the scheduled time. I'm happy to keep the channel open for anybody who wants to stay in for a bit longer, but let's just go once round and maybe say, what is it that has been valuable for me in this call? What am I taking out of the call? And perhaps let's start as we did previously, Jean and then Mark.
Sure. This has been a great call. I've enjoyed it. It's always good to sit with you, Graham. And I actually am taking action as an educator. We have a project, and won't go into too much lengthy detail, but we're preparing to run a small pilot of it. And in order for me as an educator, and I'm more than an educator, also an organizational person, but in this particular sense, in order for me to be able to tell the truth to students, I need to know that there are efforts afoot to revise society, particularly the organizational structures that govern society. And if I don't know that, I'm really kind of talking more about speculation than about what could be true in the future.
Perfect. Thank you, Jean. Mark, and then TR.
What's coming to me is that whether I like it or not, blockchain and or DAOs and or cryptocurrency are going to be part of the next decade, 2, 3 of this journey that humanity's on together. And like that, I think, is becoming clearer and was emphasized in this call. And so I think that leaves me something to think about in terms of how I want to place myself in that reality. So thank you.
Thank you, Mark. TR, then Gareth.
Yeah, it's been great to carry out these connections from this call, and looking forward to meeting into the future with those that have scheduled. And yeah, I just wanted to also share a link that was OpenEXO, which is one of the only other thought communities that I know of that's around the DAO crypto space. So that this community has that in mind as well and can incorporate. I am looking forward to delving into work with the helium marketplace so that we can get conservation organizations paid for their IoT sensor data, which is a project we have in the works currently.
Beautiful. Thank you, TR. And TR, if you're not connected with me yet on Twitter, please do connect with me on Twitter, Graham Boyd, PhD, assuming you're on Twitter. Gareth, and then Patrick.
Thanks, folks. It was really good as always to be in a call with people who are very considerate of different views and listen, and they listen, like truly listen, not just pay lip service to what others are saying. So really appreciate that. Also really appreciate that we were able to come together to kind of push the boundaries of where we're going to take action and what we're going to do together. So thank you for that. That was an awesome call. Really good. Good energy. Cheers. Check.
Thank you, Gareth. Patrick, and then Graham.
Thanks, Graham. What I find interesting is the work you're doing, or the work we're doing. There's always 3 levels. The first level is utopia, so everybody think it's possible. Then people get in movement and start to build a dream and make that dream a reality. And then last level is the reality, the new normal. So when I look at all the work you did so far, okay, over the last 10 years, Graham, I see that you're in that reality. This is part of your normal life for you. What you're teaching us, or what you're bringing is the reality. What we are doing here is we're in action to make that dream come true. And there's all the other people that just believe that it's like utopia. But there's something in those 3 levels. And Jean, you were talking about truth, and what is the truth I'm telling to my students, okay, is in the utopia, in the action to make that dream real or the reality, there's common grounds. What the people find impossible is the same thing that you're finding in your own reality. So when you start to look at what are the truths in those 3 levels, what is the common ground of those 3 levels? These are really good signs of the truth. And then let's work on how we can purify that truth altogether to start working in that direction together. And so that's what
I think I've lost the connection.
We can hear you, Graham.
Right. Okay. You could hear me. I lost the connection for a moment, but you could still hear me. Sorry, my internet sometimes goes unstable at this time of night. Right, we're back. Thank you very much for that, Patrick. I've thoroughly enjoyed this call, coming in as a call without Jack or myself having planned to address a specific topic or a guest speaker. And simply to, as you were saying, Patrick, I really appreciate those 3 levels. To go through those levels and specifically to look at what are we each building in reality and how can we weave those things together. Wonderful. We will be having another call on the last Thursday of the month in February. You'll all be getting an email about that, and I hope to see you on that call. Thank you very much, everyone.